And our session host, I'm really happy and proud to say, is Michele Romero from Green for All, or Dream Corps. She can tell you which designation she prefers. And Michele will then be introducing the other members of the panel. And thank you for all of you for being here today.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Okay.
Is that working?
Hello? Okay, should be working now. Thanks, everyone. I'm Michele Romero, the new National Director of Green for All, where we're building an inclusive green economy strong enough to lift people out of poverty. And believe it or not, you all are a part of delivering a clean economy for all. And so as we have throughout the day talked about, how to select building materials that advance your work, how we select sites and places to build, how we engage with local governments to do that, how we design, and all of these different aspects of the built environment. I invite you to take a step back in this session and to explore with us how the built environment has a truly profound impact on human health and can deliver, in the choices that each of you in this room make, triple bottom line results for people, the planet, and profit. So with that, I would love to introduce, my mom's calling, it's not a good time. They always know. So with that, I'd love to introduce our four fantastic panelists. Anthony Burheim, who's the Healthy and Resilient Buildings Program Manager of the San Francisco International Airport. Denise Fairchild, President and CEO of Emerald Cities Collaborative. Dr. Shamir Gumra, BREEAM Director. And Taylor Keep, Building Sciences Lead at Katera. So each of our panelists will share with you from their own experience what they have found in their work that is helping to deliver a healthy and clean economy for everyone. So with that, let's just dive in. Anthony, so you have been doing a lot of work at the San Francisco International Airport to really address the changing chemistry of the air, right? A lot of us are focused here on sea level rise and other sorts of issues related to climate resilience, but there's this issue of the chemistry of the very air we breathe changing and what we can do in our decisions around the built environment to improve those outcomes. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're doing there at the airport?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Is this on? How's that? There you go. So by way of starting, just to remind you that when we talk about climate change, we talk about global warming. When the heat rises, people don't do too well. We talk about extreme weather, and again, people don't do too well. But the third item is really this issue of chemistry and the air quality chemistry changing. And that's what I want to focus on this afternoon, because we haven't talked about that at all today. So I'm going to do a little bit of chemistry, very light chemistry, and there are probably two things I want you to remember today. This is one of them, and I'll come to the other. So when you start your car, particularly outside, you produce greenhouse gases, not just carbon, but greenhouse gases. And when sunlight, the UV in sunlight, touches and reaches those UV gases, primarily nitrous oxides and hydrocarbons, it forms ozone. Ozone outside is very nice stuff. It causes asthma and allergies and kind of gives you a runny nose and teary eyes and gives you a respiratory irritant, and it's not great. And it's particularly not good if you have a school playground right next to a freeway and the freeway air moves right on there. So that's part one of this. Part two is when you bring that ozone through the mechanical system into buildings, and most of the air in buildings comes from the outside. Generally, we filter that for particulate matter, but we don't filter for ozone. Ozone is a change agent, meaning it reacts with all the chemicals that we put in the buildings that are being emitted by the materials that are put into these buildings. And they form aldehydes, which are respiratory irritants, asthma, allergies, etc. Formaldehyde, which is a known carcinogen, and very fine particulate matter that is getting through the nose, into the lungs, and into the bloodstream. So we have a problem because climate change is going to affect the health of the public, of you, our friends, our families, our colleagues, the community, and people who live on this planet. So yeah, we've got to deal with water rising, but we've also got to deal with the air around us. So one of the things we did at the airport is we said, we're building a very large new terminal, 1 million plus square feet of space. We've got millions of passengers passing through there every year, and we have about 40,000 people working at the airport, not all in Terminal 1, but many of them in this terminal. How are we going to understand the air quality in that space? So we partnered with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. They did outdoor air testing for us adjacent to Highway 101. The air moves from Highway 101 onto the airport. It is right next to where the major jets, these big 4-engine things that line up, they taxi in and they sit there and they wait their chance to rev all their engines and take off for Asia and Europe and wherever they're going. So it is not a very good space. And we asked the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab to do this and emulate for the worst times of the year when we have high pressure sitting over the airport, so that we would know what's outdoors. And they wrote a nice report saying, here's what you've got to measure for, here's what you're going to filter for to bring the air into the building. And then on the other side, they said, the air in this building has to meet the California standard, meaning there are about 80 chemicals that we know about at common founding buildings, and we want them below a certain level in order to keep all of you healthy in this terminal. And we gave that to the design builders, and they gave it to mechanical engineers. They had responses only from 2 filtration companies, and we came up with a filtration system that deals with the small, the fine, and the large particulate matter, and then we put a photocatalytic oxidation system to get rid of the odor, and the 2 major chemicals that we were looking for, which is naphthalene, which is basically a substitute or the surrogate for the burnt and unburnt jet fuel, and for formaldehyde, which we know is outside in the airport. So we're cleaning the air before we bring it in, and then we put a 1-inch carbon filter to catch, and sort of like belt and suspenders, and to support that PCO filter. So we're basically looking at what we can do to improve the environment in buildings, and we're also trying to understand what's going on outside. So then you might say, well, what is the impact on energy? Well, there is that filtration system added 1 EUI, 1 energy use intensity unit, to our calculations. And when you understand that a typical terminal at this airport runs at about 179, 180 EUI, that's kBTU per square foot per year, and this new terminal is modeled between 60 and 70 kBTU per square foot per year, with a 70% increase in passenger count in that building, we are doing energy conservation, keeping the energy low, but we are keeping the population healthy at the same time. So basically, we want to make sure that those 2 pieces work together, basically decarbonizing and keeping people healthy.
Yeah, I love that you talk too about, so the built environments affect not just on the people inside the building, but on outside the building too. And so low-income communities and communities of color are hit hardest by pollution from all sorts of sources, whether it's power plants or transportation pollution. And so understanding what we can do in the built environment to make sure that we're not a part of the problem, but actually a part of the solution is really great. I actually want to turn to you, Denise, for a moment here. So Emerald Cities is focusing in really on 6 cities in the U.S. Tell me a little bit about how you chose those cities and what you're finding have been some of the best practices to deliver health and equity outcomes.
Testing? Working? All right. So let me not answer the question and do something different completely.
Do your thing. Do your thing.
Well, one of the things, Emerald Cities is national, and we are focused on working at the intersection of the environment, the economy, and equity. And we are looking at this in a way that I think is important for you all to recognize that we are all a part of a clean energy revolution. There's a revolution taking place right now, and it's whether it's new building codes that the governor talked about, or new technology, smart buildings, new innovative financing. It's all moving towards new sources of energy, whether it's moving from dirty energy to clean energy. But the fact of the matter is, while this revolution is taking place, I don't think it's radical enough. I think that we're looking to the building sector to actually move from transactions to transformation. And what does that really mean? at the end of the day, this revolution with every economic transition, and this is an economic transition we're looking at, as profound as from going from agriculture to industrial to suburban to digital economies, and it has impact on winners and losers. There are winners and losers that's going to come out of this new energy economy. So, you know, and the question is then what is your role? What it is that we do to try and make sure that the income disparities, that the health disparities, that the wealth disparities are not reproduced, that you and I do not reproduce these kinds of disparities in this new clean economy. And so when I look around this room, I'm seeing that even though we're talking about clean energy, disparities exist, right? Where is this question of our role, your role in this is diversity and inclusion. Where is the diversity and inclusion? How do we ensure that this new clean economy brings in folk who are really the new demography of the United States? How do we make sure low-income community of color step up into this space? That is your job, and you've kind of figured out how is it that I'm supposed to advance economic and social justice? How am I, in the building sector, supposed to, in fact, improve the disparities of the past? Several things I would want to offer that we're doing. Number one is local hire and local procurement. Find a way to engage folks that you normally don't work with as a part of your business, a part of your firm. The issue of women architects, there are less than 1% of architects are African American women. Very few small minority women or even veteran-owned contractors are working on green buildings. What is your role, and how can you really step up into that space to make sure that you have a diversity and inclusion policy and you're bringing folks in? How do you bring young people into this space? We have at Emerald Cities a high school program, a STEM program, and where we're training folks and getting community college credit as they get high school credit, learning BIM and learning all the other technologies and tools of your industry, right? But at the same time, they're actually interning with you. They're watching you, they're shadowing you, they're learning how to do this and how to get the experience of working in this sector. So it's something that they want to do other than rapping and, you know, working on, you know, some high-tech stuff. So how do you work with diversity and inclusion? Secondly, how to make sure that you pay fair wages, livable wages, union wages. If we're going to not have a two-tiered economy of the very rich and the very poor, then we have to make sure that we're paying our contractors and others fair wages. Thirdly, I would say that as a building sector, how do you do the hard stuff? Today, right now, as we speak, for the next 3 days, we are doing energy audits on 600 affordable housing units to retrofit them to be energy and water efficient. These are the hard buildings. If you think the municipal university schools and hospitals are tough, try and do affordable housing project. The most vulnerable populations who will be left out of this clean economy because of a variety of issues with financing as well as who owns the building and who gets the benefit of the investments. Adopt an affordable housing project as a part of your work to make sure that, you know, these buildings and these populations get the opportunity and don't get stuck in an energy ghetto, right, of old, dirty buildings. Fourth, create communal buildings, right? Communal buildings. What do I mean by that? At the end of the day, whether you're working with a university or a hospital, they have huge real estate where you can put in substantial community solar projects that can feed not only the institution itself, but that can feed the community around it that cannot, in fact, carry forth its own, solar or energy projects. How do we make a building communal and be able to share, community solars with folks that don't have access to that kind of opportunity? And lastly, I would say that one important thing to think about is how to build community wealth. And the whole idea of a regional energy system, I know it's a big political issue, but the big issue in terms of frontline communities and communities of color is how do we build a new energy system that is actually community-owned and community-controlled? How can we, in fact, bring those resources back into our community to reinvest in other things that need to advance community development? So there's really a big difference in our mind about how you build a revolution that doesn't reproduce the monopolies, the inequalities of the past, and everybody, even the carbon-free environment and players have a role to play, but you have to really be intentional about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything she just said. There is this real problem about, the high quality of life and or the high cost of living and the low quality of life and how we address that. And that's one of the biggest opportunities that we have. Pivoting a little bit and talking about affordability and what leads into affordability, right? We know solar and energy efficiency can help reduce the cost of living for low-income communities. I want to talk a little bit about building materials, too, and how that can play a role. So, Taylor, Katerra is revolutionizing the building design and construction industry, pioneering some creative ways to use materials like CLT. So if you could just share, what is CLT? How are you using it in your business, and how is that helping improve things like affordable housing and addressing other environmental and health issues?
Great, yeah. So CLT is part of a growing category of engineered wood products that, if I were just going to make it simple, it's small diameter wood that's joined together to act like large diameter wood. And so you take a lower quality or more abundant and readily available product, and you bind it together and make it act, have the fire and structural properties of heavy timber, which is kind of hard to come by. So really exciting category of product. We're really excited about it because it's an awesome material for mid-rise buildings, which are actually really hard to build. Buildings that are kind of small for concrete and steel construction. CLT is an excellent construction system for that type of building. But maybe more fundamentally, and kind of in alignment with Katerra more broadly, it's really that it's an introduction of a whole new approach to construction, because CLT is a manufactured product. You take wood and you do all this value-added manufacturing off-site, and then on-site it's more of an assembly process. So it's a really different feeling of how you build. We think that that's a big part of affordability. It's actually, the wood fiber is, yes, abundant and locally sourced and lower carbon than a lot of other materials, but it's really that it's a full economic shift that really adds up to a fundamental change in the cost of a building. So really, what does that mean for health and equity? Well, I get excited about this new supply chain, this new way of construction, because rural economies, this is an opportunity to harvest wood for a whole new segment of the construction industry. And Katerra is building a CLT factory in eastern Washington. It's going to manufacture something like 5 million cubic feet of CLT. And it's not just a raw material. It's a engineered material. It's a complex material that's going to also carry with it value-added elements, like how can you integrate electrical and lighting and other kind of building components with the structure. And that can all happen in a factory environment where workers are productive and can earn living wages. You're not trapped in the same kind of categories of labor that we've always had for 100 years. We're really excited about that. We're also excited about generating new demand for wood products, because it encourages healthy forest management practices, which are really, we talked about wildfire a bit. I think the governor mentioned it. We're excited about really creating an offtake for this small diameter wood that is so problematic for wildfire and can displace people in rural communities and create acute air quality issues, and also have mass carbon emission events. Anyway, in general, CLT, I think it's cool as a material. It's a new way of using wood, and it extends wood construction to new parts of the market. But I'd say more fundamentally, it's a re-envisioning of what the construction industry looks like, and it introduces the potential to do high-tech, value-added manufacturing in really low and mid-rise construction, which creates great job opportunities and affordability for construction.
Yeah. So far we've kind of talked about the built environment mostly from the place at which the building is occurring, right? Even if it's choosing materials or where we're building, who's affected, it's sort of locally place-based so far in this discussion. And I want to go a bit behind the scenes in a lot of ways and just have us take a look at the fuller supply chain of everything that affects the materials that we're choosing, who is working in these roles, and how it ultimately gets delivered to a place and is something that we build. So Shamir Briam works across over 70 countries. Did I hear that right? 70 countries and jurisdictions. And I imagine that in that you've seen the gamut of good governance, not so good governance, and just really terrible governance when it comes to labor conditions, environmental quality, and all of sorts of regulations. And so can you share a little bit about how in your work you've navigated that landscape and why you all are so committed still to delivering triple bottom line when it comes to health, equity, and the environment?
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. I must say it's a great privilege to be here today and to be invited here. And also to see so many people still here at the end of the day, which is incredible. So thank you for that. It's not normally, this doesn't happen in the UK at all. This is like half the room have gone by now.
It rarely happens here either.
It must
This is rare. It must have been
California.
really good.
Yeah, it must be great. So I think it's just kind of echoing something that Denise just kind of mentioned there. And I think this is something that we perhaps haven't really touched upon throughout the day, is this kind of social value. This element of, actually, we talk a lot about creating these assets, which is absolutely right, to reduce the embodied carbon, which I'll come back to in a moment. Look at the operational carbon and where we've gone on, obviously, in terms of cycles of looking at these assets over their lifetime, which will be around for a long time, and we're building more and more and adding to the existing housing stock and commercial building stock and so forth. Is if we talk about, the asset, what about the spaces between assets? These are community spaces. These are spaces in the public realm which have huge benefits to society, to local communities. And increasingly, we're seeing more and more organizations needing to demonstrate what is the social value. So actually, you can build to certain specifications or codes, but actually what benefit, what contribution are you going to make to this local community? And by example, one of the things I often talk about is, well, you can have a contractor who can say, well, actually, we're going to build this school, and it's great, and we're going to paint this shed in the school playground a few times, and someone else will come along and say, yeah, we're going to paint the shed as well. And by the time you finish the project, the shed's been painted about 14 times. And actually, if someone had bothered to ask the school, they probably said, we don't actually need the shed, there's nothing in it. And could you just knock it down and give us more playground space, or a slide would be lovely, actually. But this is the whole question around, the reliance on some of the quantitative aspects. If we're not careful, there can be unintended consequences. Not to say, obviously, it's clearly very important and highly relevant to be focusing on carbon. So I think the social value question is something we have got to unravel, and there are obviously benefits in terms of the product, the asset, and the community that they serve, which is something that Denise was alluding to. I think the other element is construction. As I look at where Bream operates around the world, and I actively go out there and talk to the supply chain around nuances, aspects of challenges that they might have in certain markets. Some of the issues are really quite common, and they're not often that different from, let's say, the retail sector or the clothing sector or the food sector, and look at the built environment, particularly when you talk about supply chain transparency. And increasingly, if we are going to be talking about, well, where are the products and services coming from, how transparent are we genuinely being about our activities, and where does our responsibility lie as well, I think is something we have got to start to understand a bit more. So if you're an architect or a designer, there are some things absolutely that are maybe well without, out of your realm of control in terms of where is the project and where is the asset going to be built, what type of supply chain may you be able to specify or not. And some of that is things that we've got to start to be a bit more mindful of. But if we look at that, awarding a big contract to a major contractor, inevitably they'll subcontract out elements of those packages, and then again and again and again, and we're going 4, 5, 6 tiers into the supply chains, and then people have lost transparency. We're not understanding as much, well, I gave it to them and them and them, and I'm not entirely sure who's got the job now. And it's highly risky. if only from a business commercial resilience perspective, that if there's issues around not only understanding where products have come from, to be able to genuinely demonstrate actually what is that supply chain, what is that embodied carbon, how far has it actually come from. And maybe we thought it was coming from the state of California, it turns out it's actually come from further afield. What are those risks within those supply chains that perhaps we don't fully appreciate? And again, as has been echoed a bit earlier on, if there's an opportunity to work with smaller, perhaps more local suppliers, maybe that can give us that bit more assurance that, okay, we can benefit society, benefit local community, we have a bit more assurance, perhaps if they're being paid the minimum wage, the living wage, actually we can go and check that, we can see it, we can give ourselves some more assurance and confidence that these things are actually happening. Whereas if the supply chains are far-flung, distributed around the world, I don't know. And that's genuinely sometimes the concern that we have. We don't actually know. And then there's time and effort to investigate these supply chains to understand what are those risks. Is there modern slavery? Is there child labor? These are very, very real, scary things that are happening in all parts of, not only in construction, in other sectors around the world. And as I've done a lot of work on this subject in the UK, people are trafficked and people are moved from one type of situation to another. And in the UK, construction is identified as one of 4 high-risk sectors for modern slavery. Others, car washes. I don't know if you have the same issue here. So lots of sort of labor-intensive car washes have popped up in the UK in recent years, primarily from people from Eastern Europe. Then there's the agricultural sector, where people are obviously just picking up fruit from fields and that kind of thing. And the other one is nail bars, and often it's people primarily from a Vietnamese background, and there's sex trafficking and drugs and horrible, horrible things happening. And it's a really kind of scary world that we kind of live in. But if people are being exploited from the field where strawberries being picked, and then there's a construction project, they're traded. But these human beings are traded as commodities by these criminal gangs, and they're trafficked from one project to another. So it's not as discreet to say that it's just the built environment or construction industry supply chain issue unto ourselves, and if we sort this out, it'll be fine. It's about all these other aspects that come into it. So really, whilst quite poignant and scary, but if we kind of start to unravel some of these things and have better transparency of our supply chains, then we can start to kind of unpack some of this, which it also gives us better accessibility to better data, understanding what actually is the embodied carbon in the context of some of these things that we've been speaking about today. But bringing it back to what is our responsibility. And I think if you look at the various actors in the supply chain, with your contractor, a designer, or a client, who's mandating that requirement, that ownership, the assurance to say, well, this is not acceptable. And your point earlier, Michele, about governance, is so much of this is about the entity, the values that the organization has, what they believe, how they profess to act in society, and how they operate, and all these other things. Lots of transparency. I've learned a lot today about how many more of your cities have transparency requirements. And there's this thing in my mind when I look at my own products within Bream, is how do you try and reconcile, you've got products going into assets, but how do you reconcile something like governance and values of an organization in terms of what it is that they do and how they stick those things together? They make products, but actually lots of people make a brick or a curb or whatever, or a bit of insulation or something. And you could have low carbon, and other people will fight to have lower carbon products, great. But what about the values of the organization? So sometimes surely they kind of get it. They work better with their community. They're just much more robust, much more values-driven organization. And one of the challenges I've got is how do I try and bring some of that recognition into an assessment methodology that is about the asset? And this whole thing around, well, how much of it is social value? How much of it of the product, the fact that you're making it locally, benefits the local community, benefits the product, creates a kind of a secondary impact, whether it's low carbon or whatever else it is, embedded in use phase, end of life, circular economy principles. All these things then start to kind of come out from that core principle of governance, transparency. So I'm mindful of kind of running out of time, but it's really, really so poignant that there's so many other things within this that, if we can get better appreciation of what we mean by specification, that understanding of what our responsibility is, I think quite fundamentally, then maybe we've got a better chance of just being, a better approach that leads us to more transparency, better impacts and benefit for society, and quite frankly, just remembering that it is about humanity as well.
Yeah. The point about value reminds me of this similar conversation that's happening in the climate finance space too, of when we're investing in projects or investing dollars in a company or in something, how to assess for value that may not be monetary, but that are really, really important things that we need to drive towards. So with that, we put a lot of different points up on the board, and we want to open it up to some conversation. Andrew, do you want to come in? And yeah,
Right.
He's going to tell us how it's going to go next.
All right, I got it. Right. So once again, we want to make this a co-created event. So we're inviting your participation. What we'd like you to do is, what is the thing that you just heard that you found most intriguing, most sparked your curiosity, your interest, your passion, and your need to know more? So please, everybody in the room, stand up, turn to somebody you have not met or spoken to today, if you can, if there is such a person, and have a 2-minute conversation about that question.
Narrative work. This was the closest we get to the compassion connection.
Yeah,
FYI,
totally.
you can
totally
use
right.
it.
Yeah, totally right. Yeah. I'm going to steal one of your mics and you can share it. Yeah. You are fabulous. That was,
I know you
are
were
you
super
not
nervous
just
because I was
not
too
just
busy to
okay.
respond to half your emails.
I have to tell you that this is the best panel of the day from my perspective.
Oh, well, thank you.
And I've been here all day. I'm like, they are awesome, all of them, and especially, don't you think?
Yeah. And the crowd.
Whatever we can do to give her more time,
Yeah.
I want to do. So, okay.
You know what's scary to me?
Yeah, were you here this morning? You weren't here this morning, right? So actually, when we started out this morning, to frame the whole day, I said, you know, what we're really after, it's not just like a technical net zero carbon building proven by data. What we're talking about is how do we create a compassionate community? What is a just and compassionate community that supports a healthy environment, a healthy community for everybody in the world? How do we do that? And so this bookends that opening of the whole conference in just a perfect way. So I want to, if we can use the word compassion.
Yeah, I was thinking that
You know?
too. We should just tie that in. And then what comes after us? Does anyone like say final remarks?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got Andrew Steer from the World Resources Institute he's primed at that. He's going to be great to take what you all have been talking about, tie the whole thing together and talk about how do we engineer the kind of revolution that Denise is talking about. Okay, fantastic.
I'm going to steal this one to handle Q&A out in the audience. I took it from the stage. There's two. I'm going to stand in the middle. Yeah, okay? He'll share with the chair.
But I tried to get mainly
I also wanted to ask you, are you going to be here during the rest of the day as well? Oh, okay. Well, the reason I'm asking is that at the very end of the day, so this runs until 6 o'clock. At the very end of the day, nobody knows this, but we're going to have a demonstration. We've got a bullhorn, and we're going to march out of here, out onto the quad, and we're going to read the Carbon Smart Building Declaration about how health and equity fit into the whole picture of zero net carbon buildings. And we're going to do that out in the outside.
Is it targeting any particular decision maker or just a general?
No, it's the declaration of the entire movement, So,
So demonstration, not protest. Just
well, yeah, let's call it a demonstration.
yeah.
And it's a
That's why I was like,
declaration.
is there like
Yeah,
a target
it's
around
not a
this?
protest.
Okay,
No,
yeah.
a protest is like that's wrong. We got to change. This is about what are we going to do positively to change the world. So the question, I'm going to be looking for people to take pictures of that. Yeah.
I don't know. I can't. I already have
Okay,
I'm supposed to
We'll-
go to a Latino dinner thing too.
we'll find a lot of people to take pictures.
Yeah. I saw some other cameras around. So
Yeah, they are. Well, everybody's got one in the pocket.
I know,
you
yeah.
Yeah. We're going to put you out of business, my goodness.
I know, I know. I got.
Yeah.
We're just trying to get, we take photos with our cameras at so
Yeah,
many
yeah.
things that whenever we need something for our website or like a higher quality image, we just
Yeah.
have nothing. So we're like, okay, this week, all the events that we're at, we just need to capture our content.
So we've got, we're going to have video for you
Oh, I
also.
love that.
Yeah, yeah. Hello, everybody. All right, turn around. Come on around. We're going to put you all back into the room. Hello, everybody. Thank you. All right. All right. So I was just talking to Michele just a minute ago, and thinking about, we began this day by talking about how, we're talking about carbon-based life forms living in a decarbonized environment, which sounds a little bit contradictory to me, actually. But the context for all of this, for this entire day, for everything that we're doing, is a fundamental question about how do we create a compassionate community of human beings living in a healthy and sustainable way in an environment that supports them in harmony with that environment, in a world that is just, equitable, and positive for all of us on Earth. And so this panel fits into that context in a very precise way, I think. And I really want to hear a lot more from you all about it. But first, we're going to harvest a few of those conversations that have been going on out here. If you've got something that you heard, not perhaps something that you said, but what you heard that was amazing, insightful, remarkable, and you want to report it, put up your hand and we'll get you a mic right now. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Lisa Matheson. And I loved everything you guys had to say. It was great. I want to talk a little bit, and I was talking with some people here about something that Anthony said about this whole process of figuring out what's in the air and then trying to make sure the building is clean enough so that people in it, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just sitting here thinking this is like the conversation we used to have about waste when we started realizing that you can't just throw it away. There is no away. And it's wonderful if we talk about making the air inside the buildings clean. But what you're implying is that the air outside the buildings can be dirty, and that's going to go somewhere, and it's not. So that just kind of hit me that there is no away that with dirty air as well. And especially this summer with all the smoke, where does it go?
Somebody else? Another hand up. We've got a mic over here, and we'll run over to you. There's a hand right back there.
Coming around. Hello. I met with Stet over here. Hi, Stet. From Smith Group in San Francisco. And he was telling me about how Smith Group, and I hope I represent this properly, Smith Group has been looking internally at their hiring practices to see how they can be more inclusive with hiring. And one of the things that they're doing is a scholarship program to help bring more people who are underrepresented within the industry into the industry. So I just thought that was a great initiative that was being done.
One or two more? Right here, Steve. And you've got a mic coming up behind you there.
So it was something Denise said that I really liked, which was to not think transactionally, but think transformationally. And we all have day jobs. We're abandoning them today, but we all have day jobs, and everything we do, almost every minute, is transactional. I got to get something done. I got to meet a deadline. I got to put something on paper. I got to send a letter. And we forget that every action we take has the capacity to make a difference. And so that's the words that are going to be written big on my desk next week is transformational.
All right. We've got one more in the back, and then we're going to turn it back over to the panel.
Hi, I'm Allison Wolf with CommonWise, and we are looking at forest, watersheds, and food system resilience. So we're hyper-focused on creating markets for wood in California and other Western markets where we need to thin forests and do very smart things without wood. And I'm doing a lot of hosting right now, and I am horrified at the lack of diversity in these conversations. I mean, if we look in this room, certainly in forests, where historically forests were not safe for people of color, there's a deep history there that I'm very deeply concerned about. So I'm trying to figure out what are the pathways for more talent to come into the solutions area.
Go ahead, Michele.
Should we give that one to the panel? Some of the pathways for coming into the solution space. And I'll say, too, as you're thinking, right? I mean, there's a lot of genius. I think part of it is tapping into the genius and solutions that already exist in low-income communities and communities of color and uplifting those. So as I was hearing even from the audience, you know, how you've responded to some of the panelists and the work that you're even doing to create green job pathways in your own industries or at your own company, thinking about how to ensure that that's including formerly incarcerated communities and reentry folks, right? We've got a lot of talent that we've locked up, and as we have those people returning back home to communities, really creating pathways into the new green economy. A lot of these construction jobs, a lot of these opportunities at your companies would be great for that. What are some other ideas?
No, I just want to say you are the pathways. You are the pathways. Experiential learning, that's how young people learn. I've raised two young black males in South Los Angeles. One was totally bored with school because he was taught to, and another who is an aerospace engineer today because he learned by doing. And he built rockets, and he built this, and he acted out Shakespeare, and he did internships. People learn because they see what they're learning by working with you. And so finding you are the role model. You are the pathway for many people, and it's better than any classroom or textbook or anything that you can do is just extend yourself.
I think I just kind of add to that in the UK we've got apprenticeship programs, which are kind of sort of semi-structured approaches to facilitate and place people from all sorts of backgrounds, particularly low-income families or particular demographics across the country, into various trades and partnering with an organisation so they actually learn practical skills whilst getting the qualifications. And it takes a commitment when you've got a 16-year-old, and when you're doing these things, sometimes you've got to think, oh, hang on, our factory is X miles away, but they can't drive yet. And it's just other things that we've got to structurally recognise how we can accommodate and learn and allow these people to grow. And another thing is something that we're doing in our own business is around sort of unconscious bias training as well, because sometimes we perhaps might not know that we have various inherent biases to certain situations or whatever, whether it's around diversity or a male-female split or whatever it is. And that's something we're starting to maybe recognise and also try and support our employees and managers and people managers, particularly when it comes to the interviewing process around, well, is that maybe something that we're not understanding well enough, as well as trying to do something about it?
Yeah. That reminds me of this video project I was working on recently. We were showing a low-income weatherization program and documenting the stories of people who've participated in the program. And in reviewing the footage, we had to say, as one man is explaining his $1,000 energy bill, I had to tell the editor, I said, well, you need to make sure you put in clips there that explain all of those ways he was telling us that he saves energy. He's one that unplugs his outlets and all of this. I said, if you just talk about the energy bill, people viewing it are going to think, well, he's just wasteful. And it's fighting the unconscious bias that exists that lead us to sometimes assumptions that aren't true. So if there's not another question from the audience, or as we go to the next question, I wanted to also circle back to something when we, right before we turned to the audience, we started getting into this really big, complex issue of how we even analyze or assess other value in making decisions. And so, Anthony, I know that you had some ideas around that and sort of how to assess the different things as we're making cost decisions. What are your thoughts there?
We've been talking about triple bottom line, and I've heard that term on this panel and a few other places today. LEED has a pilot credit where if you choose 6 LEED credits and you do a triple bottom line cost-benefit analysis, which is a sustainable return on investment on those 6 credits, you come up with an answer and you get a point or 2 in LEED. So we had one of our terminal projects do this analysis. The report came back, and I looked at one of the charts, and I fell off my chair. And the reason I fell off my chair is that they did an analysis, and I'm going to start in the order of the most triple bottom line benefit. 12 times the energy benefit was life cycle assessment and reduction of carbon and greenhouse gas, based on the cost of carbon. The second one was the low emitting materials, based on productivity and human health. The third one down, in our case in this airport, was water. And somewhere down at the bottom there was energy, partly because we're using low carbon energy. But we now can start to look at using triple bottom line cost benefit analysis. AutoCase is the tool, Impact Infrastructure, the company that's been helping our consultants at the airport do this. But it told us that we need to start focusing on LCA, life cycle assessment, carbon reduction of embodied energy in products, and human health. That was a message we got loud and clear.
Do we have one last question? Yeah. Nope? Okay. So I'm going to go to you all. If you could just, in closing, share what does this look like at the end of the day if we're successful in each of us contributing toward delivering a clean economy for all, one that really addresses the health disparities, addresses the pollution disparities, addresses the economic disparities, right? All of these things. What is the world that we're fighting for? Whatever that looks like to you. You each just,
Right.
what is
Shall I
what does
start?
that
Shall I
look
start then, in case then you can claim that you were going to say that in a minute? I think for me, with a lot of things that we've been talking about throughout the day, as well as where we've kind of come to coalesce around these particular issues in this plenary, is around the role of specification. And so much of, and I've heard it so many times in my entire career in construction around early intervention and, do this here and it'll save money later on and whatever, but a principle of specification, and I guess being more mindful of that specification and that role of, the essence of that responsibility within the activity of specifying products, materials, services, and the design of what we're going to be doing, whether it's from a low carbon lens, whether it's from more an ethical lens, whether it's from a supply chain, ethnic minorities getting involved in projects, or whatever that lens is just being more mindful at that very, very early stage of its potential impacts and benefits and the opportunities it will give and the risks it will reduce for the creation of the asset, but also for the society and humanity around that creation of that asset as well.
So the vision for the future, as I see it, is called energy democracy. And if you want to know what that is, I have a book. Amazon.com, not wanting to push the Amazon, but and it's really the narratives of frontline communities from rural Mississippi to Asian immigrant communities here in the San Francisco area to young black and brown leaders in the Bronx to young white high school students who are forming their own energy co-ops. It's the story of another movement that's part of this revolution that's driving a future that is about energy democracy. And part of that vision is how we understand our role in the ecosystem, our place in the ecosystem, and how we see the environment, energy and water, the sun, and or ocean as part of the commons, as something that is shared value, and not owned by any particular body. But because in this era of climate change, in a vision of resilience, we have got to figure out how to be interdependent. We have to figure out how to survive long term, and our ability to survive is going to be rooted in how we treat nature and how we use nature for our own existence. So instead of us thinking about smart buildings being more efficient, instead of making McMansions zero net energy buildings, let's not build McMansions, okay? Let's really understand that we can no longer, do mass production, mass consumption, and mass accumulation of wealth because our survival depends on a different kind of construct about what life is all about.
I love hearing Denise talk. It gets me so excited. So personally for me, I care a lot about my community, and I've lived in diverse communities my whole life. I'm a lifelong renter, probably will always be, and I've felt so privileged when a lot of my neighbors often don't have the same choices that I have, and when there's fire in and around the Bay Area, I can flee to Sacramento for the week and come back later, and my neighbors can't. And I've always felt that passion is separate from my career for some reason. I've always felt torn in my life, where I've been pulled away from my career to maybe more purposefully pursue, the shared outcome of my community. And so I think the future has to be the merging, for me personally, the merging of my day job and my life, my passion. And I think there's a transformation that I've known it in my head, but it hasn't made it into my habits and my heart, where the built environment and those of us that are shaping it, we really have to, I think we are a great shot at transforming the economy, at really giving new pathways up from joblessness, from unemployment, from generations of poverty. I think we are a really great vehicle to thriving in this country. So I think that's the biggest thing. I think that construction in general needs to transform. I completely believe that we need higher productivity jobs, and we have to stop siloing and chopping up our projects into 1,000 different pieces so that we're all immobilized. And we need to think about how we can build in a new way, and how we can have higher value added roles to play in that step, where we're not disparaging my own background as a design consultant. You're always really upset at how disempowered you are. You don't touch enough of the project, or if you're a builder, you're like, gosh, I just want to do a little bit more upstream. And so I think that has to come together, and that's part of the reason I'm at Katera, is to try to live into that vision. And then lastly, I do think we have to think about embodied energy. There's been a lot of conversation about that here, and it's sometimes I just think construction systems, they're baked in the code. There's 5 types, and you pick one that matches the scale of your project. And I feel like we have to apply new logic and new metrics to the materials we choose to build with. And I think mass timber is an interesting case study. It's by no means the only one, but we need to be very creative about what materials we choose in our buildings. Oh, hemp buildings. You heard it from Denise first. Okay.
So as I thought about this panel last night, I wrote something down, and I thought I would just end by reading it to you. So indulge me for 1 minute. Climate change and the resultant air quality changes are impacting our health, our children's health, and the health of future generations. By focusing on decarbonization and addressing climate pollution, we have a great opportunity to improve our health and the health of our communities and the health of everyone on this planet. Switching to clean energy combined with clean and green building products and materials will save lives and will improve all of our health, the health of us and the health of our planet. Thank you.
Wow. I am just inspired listening to each of you in these last closing remarks. Can I just hear one more round of applause for our panelists? The stakes could not be higher. And we definitely have a future to fight for, and that future really requires all of us doing our part. So I thank you so much for listening in, and I just want to, in closing, say thank you so much to the organizers of this conference. I haven't been around for the entire day, but I feel like all of the spirit that went into planning and organizing this event came with a lot of heart and intention around ensuring that we were considering the most vulnerable communities, considering all stakeholders. And the fact that there is a panel on health and equity that is a plenary session is so rare. So just a huge applause for the people who organized this event.